An explosive tale that's been lost among the dust of the Mexican desert.
There were rumors since long ago that an object crashed in Mexico.
In 1974, a mysterious incident took place that some say involved a UFO and a small plane on a collision course, followed by a race between two governments to recover the debris.
The Mexican recovery team finds a sort of a silver-shaped plastic disc.
The Mexican military recovered an object and had it on a truck, and something killed all the men.
The U.S. government responded very quickly and very organized. They've done this before.
But what happened in the Mexican desert was just the beginning of Mexico's UFO history.
The eclipse from July 11, 1991, it practically branded the modern era of UFOs in Mexico.
Over the last few decades, it has become a hotbed of UFO encounters.
When they picked up the object on radar, the first thing they did was start looking at it.
And everyone from pilots to politicians have experienced sightings.
Would you say to the governor that he didn't see something strange in the sky?
Eyewitness interviews, revealing footage, and expert analysis try to solve the mystery of what really happened that day in the Mexican desert in 1974, and the rash of documented sightings ever since. Coyame in Mexico, a small town not found on many maps. A place swallowed up by the Mexican desert, home to more agave plants than people.
Coyame is situated in the northern part of the state of Chihuahua, and our municipality is 7,000 square feet. We have between 2,000 and 2,500 people. It's a calm place, a beautiful place.
A place with no library, no archives, and no local historian. But not a town without a history. Here, history is passed from neighbor to neighbor, and it's this oral history that gives testimony to an unsolved air collision. The story begins as a civilian plane takes off from El Paso, Texas, heading for Mexico City.
August 25th, 1974. There was a plane that was coming out from El Paso. It was going to Mexico City. And it was an accident.
They
say that there was a crash between a plane and a UFO within the territories of the municipality.
I don't think this could be made up. How could someone make this up? It's true.
The 25th of August, 1974, 10:07 p.m. It was a quiet summer's night in Coyame. The town's inhabitants were beginning to turn in for the night. 500 miles away, United States air defense systems suddenly registered an unknown object flying over the Gulf of Mexico. Streaking across the sky at over 2,500 miles per hour, at an altitude of 75,000 feet, only one thing was for certain. It was not something man-made. Initial indications were that it was probably a meteor, but 60 seconds later, it became clear that it was not.
This object was traveling and descending through steps, unlike that of a meteor. Again, it was more of an arc.
The object appeared to be heading on a course towards Corpus Christi, Texas. American air defense systems were alerted. At 10:09 p.m., the unidentified flying object suddenly veered left and entered Mexican airspace, just 40 miles south of Brownsville, Texas. The U.S. continued tracking the puzzling spacecraft as it raced over Mexico. Yet what wasn't seen on radar was a small craft on a trajectory towards the UFO.
What's also interesting about this case is About the same time as this UFO was zigging and zagging, there was a plane that was leaving El Paso headed towards Mexico City.
Under cover of night, the small civilian plane from El Paso headed towards Mexico's capital city. But the plane never reached its destination. As the American military watched their unidentified flying object, it suddenly disappeared from the radar. It appeared that the unthinkable had happened, a UFO plane collision.
There's an assumption that there was a collision of some type where both the craft and the plane had collided.
The 26th of August, 1974, 8 a.m. 9 hours after a civilian plane disappeared over the desert, a Mexican recovery team searched for the downed craft. Across the border, American intelligence was listening in. At 10:35 a.m., the Americans intercepted a Mexican military radio report. The wreckage of the missing plane had been spotted just outside Coyame. Moments later, another report shockingly announced the sighting of a second wreck, but not a plane.
The Mexican recovery team finds a sort of a silver-shaped classic disc, some 16 feet 5 inches, about 5 feet thick, convex on both sides, sort of like a saucer.
The saucer's surface had the appearance of polished steel. It had no markings, no lights, and there were no bodies inside. It did, however, appear to be damaged in 2 spots, possibly caused by a collision with the civilian plane and then falling to the ground. Immediately, Mexican officials declared a radio silence on all search activities. Meanwhile, US officials offered assistance in the recovery mission to the Mexican government. Their offer was met with a denial.
The Mexican government denied it. They said, no, all we have is just a plane wreckage.
While the Mexican team collected the crash debris, the US was busy assembling their own elite recovery force at Fort Bliss, Texas. The team included 3 small Hueys and a large Sea Stallion. Ready to move out, the team was put on standby, while US surveillance assessed the situation.
The U.S. was keeping tabs again through its what I call the spy surveillance network, through their satellite surveillance as well as airplanes that were flying over at low altitude.
American surveillance revealed that the Mexicans had placed the UFO on a flatbed truck, but something had gone wrong.
They were able to see there were a number of dead bodies, so which led them to believe that something very extraordinary had happened.
The 27th of August, 2:38 p.m. Unsure of what had happened, US officials sent out their rescue team. 4 helicopters departed from Fort Bliss.
One of the things that seems obvious in this case is that the government, the US government, responded very expertly, very quickly and very organized. They had this team that assembled in Fort Bliss, and in no time were down there on site recovering this. They've done this before.
But nothing had prepared the Americans for what they found. Dressed in bioprotection suits, American soldiers approached the silent convoy and found all the Mexicans dead. There's no evidence of what killed the Mexican team, but ufologists have their theories.
They somehow came in contact with a lethal agent, a bacteriological agent that was from out of this world, or an extraterrestrial biological agent of some sort that killed them, which is my favorite theory.
The US recovery team quickly found the wide silver UFO strapped to the back of a flatbed truck. The straps were reconfigured and connected to a cargo cable from the Sea Stallion helicopter. Safely secured, the disc was lifted and taken back to the US. With the saucer gone, the team turned their attention to the remaining evidence. The plane wreckage, vehicles from the convoy, and the bodies of the Mexican team were piled together.
They gathered the debris, the bodies from the Mexican recovery team, and then they exploded them with high explosives. The reason why is to hide the evidence.
Their work done, the recovery team went back to base. Where the UFO was taken is unknown. Some have speculated Atlanta, Fort Bliss, or Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
It is an unprecedented event, and I think it's comparable to what happened in Roswell, New Mexico.
If this 1974 UFO crash was real, there was no evidence to prove it. Only the passing down of the story from generation to generation kept the tale alive, but few took it seriously. That changed in 1991. That year, not one, not two, but dozens of UFO sightings were reported over Mexico. What gave the 1991 sightings credibility was that strangers reported seeing the same thing at the same time on the same day, yet they were hundreds of miles apart. For decades, the Mexican desert has allegedly been the site of an incredible tale.
There were rumors since long ago that an object crashed in Mexico.
An object entered our atmosphere through the United States, and it crashed with a small plane.
Mexico has witnessed UFO incidents that rival anything reported in America. Mexicans just needed one uniting event to keep their eyes focused on the sky. That happened in 1991. In July of that year, one of the longest solar eclipses in history occurred. The total eclipse was visible only in a narrow corridor that included central Mexico.
A year in advance, all the Mexican people knew about the eclipse in 91. I mean, it was an event, it was a moment. All around Mexico, there were people waiting for the eclipse.
It was an important eclipse because even though there had been other eclipses that had taken place until that day, they were not on the magnitude of that eclipse.
Just after 1 p.m., the skies above Mexico darkened. Astronomers adjusted their telescopes. Millions gazed skyward. By 1991, video was commonplace. Many Mexicans used their cameras to capture the moon as it began to pass in front of the sun. To their disbelief, they also captured something else.
It was a curious thing. During the eclipse, I heard some people who were around us saying, "Look, what is that there also?"
Several people filmed and saw metallic objects that are clearly distinguished with the form of a cupola, on what is commonly called a flying object.
In Mexico City, in Tepeji del Rio, in Puebla, in Cerro de la Estrella. From all corners of Mexico came videos showing a strange metallic-looking object just east of the eclipse. The eclipse UFOs, or ovnis as they're called in Mexico, became national news. But while some were quick to claim that Mexico experienced a UFO encounter, skeptics weren't buying it.
This was one of the great events of the century as far as eclipses and astronomical events, and hundreds and thousands of astronomers, professional and advanced amateur astronomers, came from all over the world, and it converged upon Mexico City and the other towns where the eclipse was visible. Not a single professional astronomer reported seeing anything that wasn't supposed to be there.
Professional astronomers immediately offered a more scholarly response.
When the sun is totally eclipsed, like it was in Mexico on that day, the bright stars and planets become visible for a few minutes. And Venus was very brilliant, and so it was very easy to see when people looked up. And I'm sure that many of the people thought that they saw a UFO.
Skeptics had their answer, but UFO believers kept their doubts.
because of that, because so many people recorded in different cities these objects, some suggested that had to be the star Venus. But Venus was in a different position than the UFOs were in the tapes.
It was something strange that happened during the eclipse. It's afterwards, when you start analyzing and looking at the videos, that you can start to see in some of them that there are movements that maybe wouldn't correspond to a planet. When you start analyzing more calmly after the fact, that's when you start to wonder if it could have been a UFO.
The 1991 sightings set off a UFO explosion in Mexico.
The effect of the UFOs from the 1991 eclipse was like a snowball. And this allowed people with an interest in UFOs to record sightings more frequently.
While Mexico's UFO explosion came as a surprise to most, some ufologists believe it was actually predicted over 1,000 years ago. The Maya were one of the great civilizations in history. For over 600 years, they built cities, constructed reservoirs and temple pyramids, and developed an incredible understanding of astronomy.
It is incredible the knowledge that the Maya had about the sky and the planets. They had a great capacity of observation, they knew the celestial movement, and were able to determine every single important event that was going to be registered in the sky.
The Maya recorded their information on foldable books called codices. Most of these texts were burned by Spanish priests during the 1500s. Just 4 Mayan codices remain. Among them is the Dresden Codex, a document that offers an enigmatic glimpse into the Mayans' astral wisdom.
It's pure astronomical, the moon, the sun, the systems, everything is there. Anybody who has studied and analyzed that consider this document a real treasure from the past.
Among the information contained in this codex is an eclipse prediction cycle.
The eclipse of 1991 appears in the Dresden Codex.
But did the Dresden Codex predict something more?
In it, they talk about the meeting with the Brothers of the Stars, which in our language we call extraterrestrials.
When I read this, after receiving all these videos, that struck me, that really affected me, because it's like if the Mayans knew long in advance that these sightings were going to take place that day. How can you explain that? Is that a coincidence? Or they knew? I think they knew.
Literally overnight, Mexicans were mesmerized by an apparent UFO landslide. Ufologists point to the open-mindedness of the Mexican people as being partly responsible for this UFO explosion.
Mexicans have been fascinated by legends, stories, elves, fairies. That psychology and sociology allows Mexicans to keep an open mind when it comes to extraordinary occurrences. When you open yourself up to other possibilities, it is much easier to accept the UFO phenomenon.
Skeptics, however, claim that Mexico's UFO wave is more of a social phenomenon than any actual increase in visits from little green men.
Sightings always seem to come in waves, and these waves are generally, they correlate with the publicity, that if the newspapers or TV stations, whatever, are filled with stories about UFO sightings, people will go out and pay much more attention to things that they see.
Since the earliest UFO sightings, witnesses had always been subject to heavy ridicule. They were portrayed as overzealous sky watchers who wouldn't know a DC-9 from a weather balloon. But what happens when the witnesses don't fit that description? What if the person has a solid reputation and career? What if the witness doesn't just know a DC-9, but flies one? Captain Raimundo Cervantes had been flying for over 40 years. With 17,000 hours of flight time, he'd seen it all. Or at least he thought so. On the 28th of July 1994, Captain Cervantes was piloting Aeromexico Flight 129 from Guadalajara to Mexico City. He'd taken the route before and everything was in order, even the weather.
Totalmente claras. Como decimos nosotros los aviadores, se lo comenté. Se veía hasta el otro día. Totalmente despejado.
As the flight approached Mexico City International Airport, Cervantes put the DC-9 on course for landing. 5,000 feet in the air, he got the all clear from the control tower and prepared to lower the landing gear.
I ordered to lower the front wheel. At that moment, we felt an impact on the plane. Very strong.
Muy fuerte.
The plane was rocked. To Cervantes, it was obvious that they'd collided with something in mid-air. But there was no time to investigate. The pilot had already begun his descent.
En ese momento me declaro en emergencia.
At that moment, I declare an emergency and I requested an area so that I can develop the list of emergency and coordinate my personnel of flight attendants because I thought we were going to have an abnormal landing.
Un aterrizaje no normal.
Unsure of the damage to his landing gear, Cervantes needed nerves of steel to coax the wounded jet to safety.
Hacemos la nivelada del
level the plane.
avión.
We tried to land softly and steady the front wheel.
Y mantener la rueda de nariz, que era la que
I was concerned that there was damage.
estuviera dañada para que hiciera el impacto con el terreno de la pista.
We lower the front wheel, and to our surprise, the plane starts rolling perfectly.
Bajamos la nariz y nuestra sorpresa, empieza a rodar el avión perfectamente bien.
Disaster was averted. Captain Cervantes wondered if a helicopter had clipped his DC-9 on approach. But the air tower's radar recorded nothing. Yet an inspection of the DC-9 revealed damage and created more questions than answers.
There was a flight inspector that searched the plane who detected that one of the hydraulic lines was cut. It was cut like if it was done with a cutter. Something very strange.
What caused the landing gear's hydraulic line to be cut? A subsequent investigation blamed the incident on worn-out parts. The airline denied any mid-air collision. But Captain Cervantes stood by his claim that the plane had hit something. That wasn't the end of the story. Flight 129's strange encounter was about to get even stranger. Enrique Colbeck was the air traffic controller in the tower that night. Upon learning of Flight 129's incident, he instantly recalled a series of phone calls the tower had received earlier that evening.
An hour before that flight was initiated in Guadalajara, we received phone calls from different sources. They were communicating to us that an object was flying very close to a building that is almost in the final trajectory to these runways.
The sightings placed the unidentified flying object right in the landing path of Flight 129. To most, the idea of a plane UFO collision seemed unrealistic. But a few days later, another incident at the same airport raised further suspicions. On the 8th of August 1994, co-pilot Carlos Corzo was helping Aeromexico Flight 304 from Acapulco begin its descent into Mexico City International Airport. That morning, the skies were cloudy. As co-pilot Corzo was looking out of the window, the pilot's eyes were glued to the instruments.
He was flying by instruments, so all his view was on the instruments, like was taking care of the surroundings and seeing outside, and even take the communications and helping him with the approach.
As the plane broke through a cloud, a shocked Corzo saw something unexpected.
I was leaving 12,000 feet and came out of the cloud, and I see this big object in front of us, and I really get scared. I thought we was going to have a collision, and I tell my captain in a surprise expression that, oh my God, we're gonna crash.
The mysterious craft streaked by the front of Flight 304, barely missing the plane's nose.
It was a huge object, maybe 15 or 20 meters radio, something like platinum or some kind of very neat metal.
Corso quickly regained his composure and helped land the plane without further incident. Afterward, he spoke to the air traffic controller, who revealed that Corso's plane was in fact the fifth plane that week to report seeing an unidentified object.
I
can tell you about approximately 99% of pilots that I have talked to believe that we are not alone here. And the evidence that we have had confirms it. We take it very seriously because it could affect our airspace.
Definitely, there is a potential danger because we do not know what produces the phenomenon and what it is made of and why it is manifested.
Nearly a decade later, another incident in the Mexican skies sent out shockwaves. Yet unlike previous encounters, this one would have everyone believing, including the Mexican government. Every year on the 15th of September, thousands pack the main square in Mexico City to watch their president ring the very same bell that signaled the start of their fight for independence almost 2 centuries ago. The next 24 hours is full of parades, parties, and celebrations. But in the early 1990s, a new Mexican Independence Day tradition was born.
El 16 de septiembre en México es la fiesta de independencia.
September 16 is Mexican independence, and we have a military parade on the streets of Mexico.
Durante varios años,
For several years, we used to have an air show. The whole Mexican Air Force used to go out and fly over Mexico City.
la Ciudad de México.
A lot of people would film these events when the planes would pass over the houses. There are many videos where certain objects are seen, flying over and passing closely.
On the 16th of September 1991, during a flyover, an amateur filmmaker captured a mysterious bright round object. On the 16th of September 1992, an unidentified object was spotted flying through the sky. On the 16th of September 1993, as a squadron of helicopters conducted a maneuver, a metallic-looking object appeared to weave through their formation. 3 years, 3 sightings, but the Mexican military offered no comment.
With respect to the sightings of these objects during military parades, the government never voiced an opinion for or against. The government here has always remained aloof.
This comes as no surprise to the UFO community, who for decades have claimed that governments are actively suppressing UFO encounters. Blacked-out reports, secret projects, and constant denials have all fed the notion of a massive cover-up. On the 5th of March 2004, Mexico's 501 Air Squadron was on a routine search for drug-smuggling aircraft. But the military pilots witnessed something far from routine.
The Air Force in Mexico patrols the south border to stop airplanes with narcotics from South America. They regularly do this many times every day with different airplanes.
But this day was different. During an afternoon surveillance run, the team picked up something on their radars. They assumed it was a drug-running plane and took off after it. Following it on radar, the object appeared to be changing speeds erratically, at times traveling at over 380 miles per hour. While in pursuit, the crew turned on their forward-looking infrared system, or FLIR.
It's like a camera that is mounted on the aircraft, and its purpose is to look not using visible light like an ordinary camera would, but using infrared.
The infrared eyes on the plane's exterior-mounted FLIR system transmitted video to the crew inside. This is the actual video as seen by the crew. But as the air patrol got closer to the object, the crew was unable to spot anything using the FLIR or their eyes.
And all this time that they're flying towards it, they are looking ahead of the aircraft, because that's where it says that this radar target is, ahead of the aircraft, and they're looking, they couldn't see anything.
After chasing the object for several minutes, the crew decided that they were too low on fuel to continue. They turned around and began heading back to base. The unknown object soon vanished from radar.
The FLIR operator was still operating the FLIR, and he started picking up bright lights that appeared to be at cloud level.
Suddenly, appearing on the FLIR through the clouds wasn't just one ball of light, but at times as many as 11 appeared to be weaving through the clouds.
The crew got a little bit spooked over what was going on because they couldn't identify these things. They didn't know what it was they were looking at.
This was a veteran crew who'd flown this route before and had been using the FLIR system for almost 2 years. But on this day, even the most experienced of pilots would have been unnerved, as the cockpit recordings reveal. It appeared to the crew that the objects weren't just traveling alongside their plane, but surrounding it.
Jóvenes, no estamos solos. No estamos solos, de veras. Qué cosa tan rara, Nos están rodeando. Oye, ¿qué tienes?
Then suddenly, the balls of light disappeared. Over the next several weeks, the Mexican military conducted an investigation into the incident. Crew members were interviewed, images analyzed, and weather data evaluated. Yet no answers were found. It appeared the case was destined to go unsolved and forgotten. Then one phone call changed everything and made UFO history.
They called me and said, we have something that is from common interest.
Mexican TV journalist Jaime Maussan is an expert on investigating Mexican UFO claims. Maussan was asked by the Mexican government to report on the case. In an unprecedented move, Mexico's Secretary of Defense handed over to a civilian the classified FLIR UFO video.
He gave me the video and said, please be fair with the military, please be fair with these pilots, do your investigation, you are authorized officially to do your investigation, to present this in the media.
Maussan was given complete access to flight records, weather reports, and most importantly, the crew.
I am interviewing these pilots inside the Secretary of Defense. This is first in history in Mexico. They told me what they saw. They were very honest and sincere.
No, we never had the opportunity to identify them visually.
I never saw this kind of object before.
Something that we never saw before. It never happened to us before. So yes, we had fear.
On the 11th of May, Maussan held a press conference to present the tape to the world. It didn't take long for skeptics to denounce any UFO theory. Their explanations came fast and furious.
It's ball lightning. You'd have a whole fleet of these top secret aircraft flying.
Some skeptics and UFO investigators suggested that the equipment was not working well.
One after another, explanations were given, and one after another, they were discredited. Then a new theory emerged that might solve the mystery.
There's a theory that what the officials filmed out there were the flames of the oil wells that are 100 to 120 kilometers from the account.
They appeared to be brilliant glowing objects in the infrared. Of course, they were not visible to the eye, but that's the whole purpose of the infrared camera system, is so that you can see things by their heat signature. You can see things that are not visible to the eye.
Could what was showing up on the FLIR system actually be distant oil wells? Those who'd examined the case had their doubts.
First thing that we did was analyze the lights to determine their shape, to see if there was shape to them, and how did it change frame to frame, minute to minute.
If the lights were oil wells, as skeptics claimed, then they should flicker like a flame. But using computer programs to break down the lights revealed something very different.
Over a period of frames and minutes, the glow may change on the outer edges, but there is an object in the center that is rock steady. It's a ball, it's a sphere, and it's not possible that it's a flame, because if it was a flame, it would be undulating not just from the edges out, but over the entire object.
Adding to the case against the oil well theory was the fact that despite daily flights in this area, no one had ever reported these kinds of encounters before.
The only way, really, to prove this would be to do it under the same basis, using a FLIR camera, flying the same route, probably with the same airplane.
Until that happens, the Mexican Air Force encounter remains an unsolved mystery. But for UFO researchers, that doesn't take away from the importance of this case. For the first time, a government turned to the UFO community for help. Mexican UFO investigators were optimistic that this incident signaled a new era of openness by governments.
This is going to produce many new cases and more openness in the future. There are many other people who are now trying to become investigators in Mexico. This is just the beginning.
It was just the beginning. In 2005, just when it appeared that things in Mexico couldn't get any stranger, they did. Since 1991, Mexican witnesses have videotaped hundreds of hours of footage containing alleged unidentified flying objects. But while the sheer volume of sightings has impressed some, it's what's on the tapes that matters.
But out of the thousands of videos that we have, most of the times are, balloons, airplanes, stars, mistakes, honest mistakes. Probably just 10 or 15% of them are good, really good.
It's this 10% that has drawn the attention of everyone from ufologists to the mainstream media. Among the most interesting UFO phenomenons captured on tape are what is referred to as fleets.
Es un grupo de objetos de más de 3, se le llama flotilla, que viajan ya sea horizontal o verticalmente, con unas formas extrañas, ya sea boomerangs, esferas, discos.
The 10th of June 2004, Guadalajara, Mexico. An amateur photographer captures unknown objects in the sky. 21st of June 2004, 300 miles away in Cuernavaca, Mexico, another fleet caught on tape. 30th of March 2005, almost 600 miles north in Torreon, yet more unexplainable objects dot the Mexican sky. 11th of April 2005, 500 miles to the south in Mexico City, the skies over the capital city were full of mysterious aircraft.
I believe it's a way that someone is using to communicate with us. I believe they are trying to say something similar to what happened in England with the crop formations.
Skeptics were quick to dismiss fleets as nothing more than weather balloons or birds. But seeing is believing. And in June 2005, a fleet sighting had people believing.
One of the more recent accounts of UFO sightings here in Mexico happened here in Jalapa, Veracruz. And it is very interesting because the witnesses were of a very high caliber.
On the 24th of June 2005 at 10:30 a.m., a public ceremony was being held to celebrate the delivery of new patrol cars to the local police department. Dignitaries including the governor, high-ranking police department officials, and the local media were all there. Moments after Governor Beltran finished his speech, cries of UFO, UFO echoed through the crowd. Instantly, all eyes were on the mysterious objects hovering above.
We have as a first-hand witness the governor of Jalapa, and the newspapers published the news the next day, and it was spread throughout Mexico.
Days later, a local newspaper reported that the alleged UFOs were actually balloons released by local schoolchildren. But this explanation only raised more questions. If they were balloons, why did they appear frozen in formation for over half an hour?
As the witness says, it was more than 14 sphere objects that were shining in the sky, formed a triangle formation and remained there for 30 minutes. I just find it hard to believe that balloons could stay in the same place and in the same formation for half an hour.
I think this is an extraordinary observation because it's a governor and all of his advisors and police personnel who observed this case. Would you say to the governor that he didn't see something strange in the sky?
Those strange things in the sky have brought UFO experts and enthusiasts from all over Mexico together. For these men and women, the encounters that have taken place deserve attention and answers. Among the incidents examined is the alleged 1974 UFO plane collision near Coyame, Mexico.
The word is getting around somehow that something happened and that the U.S. was interested in this crash.
The information that Gilberto has is very little, but the data that makes this case lends itself to the possibility that this may have been real.
Decades later, Coyame still has more questions than answers. But are there clues out there that could break the case?
Any motivated investigative journalism student of today, or professional, could have a field day. Go to the town, track down all the people in the town that used to be there, live there by address, and find them and interview them.
It requires more rigorous study. It requires more of a collaborative effort, hopefully among the UFO research communities between the United States and Mexico. So it's a case that's going to need more further investigation.
And like many events in history, there's a further twist.
I was recently in Chihuahua and I asked about this case, and there is a rumor that there are photographs around this case that I haven't seen. I was promised that I was going to receive these photographs, but people there are still afraid. It seems that they have kept these photographs for a long, long time.
The Coyame story was shrouded in mystery again. Did a UFO crash in the Mexican desert in August of 1974? Did a Mexican recovery team fall prey to an unknown biological poison? The truth may never be known. But what we do know is that Mexico has been experiencing something out of the ordinary.